Professor Priestland, first of all, thank you very much for finding time for us and our audience, and we welcome you here in the studio of InvestForSight, a media partner for the Radar Forum at the Academy of National Economy and Public Administration. And you are an expert at this event, and as an expert on political matters, I would say, can you just give us a very general idea of your opinion about communism? Was it really historically inevitable at all?
As a historian, I'm really a historian, that's my profession, although now I do quite contemporary history, but I have studied the history of communism, and that was my original book, my original books from the history of communism, my first books. And I think as a historian, one is very wary of using the word inevitable, because I think historians are aware of, and this is something we were discussing in the panel, very aware of the multiple historical forces that operate in the world. Economic, social, political, they all combine. It's very difficult to predict what those combination of forces is going to be. And there is also contingency and chance, which is also something historians have to take account of. So, had it not been for World War I, would the communist regime, the communist revolution in Russia occurred, in large part as a result of World War I and the crises of World War I. Was it inevitable without World War I? Well, I can't say, but this was a very unusual combination of circumstances. So one would never say it was inevitable, and it was. I don't think it was inevitable that communist power arose in Russia, and neither was it inevitable that it would spread throughout the world. So I wouldn't use the word inevitable. However, there were many forces that were leading to crises of global capitalism in 1929, which helped the rise of communism, and also, of course, the anti-colonial movements of the 1950s and 60s, which also helped the rise of communism. So there were broader forces. It was inevitable, but there were very broad historical forces that contributed to the rise of communism, I suppose I would say.
Right, but in this regard, we have been seeing multiple comebacks of the ideology. It has been tried in a number of countries, and we know there are various versions, and it appears, well, I wouldn't state that as an absolute fact, but it appears that to a great extent the idea failed whenever it was tried, wherever it was tried. And still, one way or another, it returns in this part of the world, in that part of the world, everywhere. So, is this process a never-ending one?
I'm not sure I would say communism is returning, or indeed likely to return. I think communism related to a specific set of historical circumstances. What I think we're seeing now is the emergence of various forms of reaction against globalized capitalism that has emerged from the 1970s. They're forms of nationalist, statist, or nationalist state intervention in the economy. So I wouldn't call them communism. I mean, in a way, I would say that the stronger forces are from the right rather than the left. And they are from forms of nationalist, we call them populism, nationalist populism, but more on the right, I would say, than the sort of, than the communism of the left. And that's what we're seeing now. And I think that is this, you asked in a way, is this an inevitable process? I think what we see, we don't see recurrences of history. History never repeats itself in exactly the same way. But I think we are seeing a crisis of the sort of globalized capitalism that became dominant from the 70s, 80s, 90s, particularly in the 90s. And the reaction against that is this type of right-wing nationalist populism, is the way I would see it.
Right, but does that mean that the criticism and reaction against the current process is capable of producing a better solution to the problems that mankind faces at the moment, has been facing for the last centuries.
My own view is not, because I think that we do need global solutions to our problems, and I mean, I would say particularly that's the case clearly with climate change and the ecological issues. This is something we need to do internationally. So I would say that is one thing that we certainly cannot solve in terms of national and purely nationalist politics. It needs to be, and that may be rather disruptive of attempts to solve that. So certainly I would say that these solutions are not the right, in my view then, and I'm trying to not be political about this, I'm trying to be sort of from a historian's point of view and trying to think about this more broadly. I think that certainly the broader issues of well, not just climate change, but also issues of global economic development, which often are connected with issues of global justice and feelings of, certain countries that they have not been treated properly in the past, and all of these questions. These are things that can really only be solved globally and internationally rather than at a national level.
But given the fact which, I think we have to accept that the level of inequality globally is diminishing little by little. It's not spreading, it's still a downward trend. Therefore, the political and other ideological, whatever you call them, problems and conflicts, they should also diminish.
Well, I'm not sure. Global inequality, as I understand it, has diminished between some nations, and certainly with the rise of China, for instance, we've seen the rise of some nations, China and India. But then the inequality within countries often rises, and so that then leads to this sort of national, the protests and backlashes against this process of global capitalism, and of course the improvements in global inequality, any improvements in global inequality don't necessarily apply to all countries or all regions. So I think there are certain regions that feel they're not benefiting as much as they should do from this process. So I think that there certainly is a sense of a feeling that even if the figures don't always show it, there is a feeling that global inequality, or there are certain regions who are suffering from this process, and that is having this negative political backlash.
Right, but if we look forward and we see the development of the so-called Fourth Industrial Revolution, is it the answer to all the current problems in inequality, in poverty, and things like that?
By the Fourth Industrial Revolution, you mean?
Well, I mean digitalization, new technologies.
Well, I'm not quite as optimistic as that. I mean, in a way, I think often these technologies, they promised to lead to greater equality, and I'm not really sure, I'm no expert on this, but that's certainly not the feeling one gets within the West when one looks at the rise of these technologies. In a way, the profits and in a way the rise of the tech industry in the West has coincided with an increase in inequality within the West. Now, I suppose you could say, well, how is that going to help? What about globally? Well, presumably, I'm no expert on this, but I imagine that it may also lead to inequalities between certain regions and certain countries who can't invest to that extent in new technologies. So I'm not quite as optimistic as you are, but I'm certainly no expert.
Right. Here, at least in this country, years ago we had a feeling, and we were told that actually the ideas of communism, they are more about economy than anything else. At the very end of the story, the historical process is to be based on some material development, economic development, and the social forces as well. Do you share this opinion? So is communism about economy?
What's communism about the economy? I think it was about the power of communism at the time. The reason why it was appealing to so many people was because it was about development, but it was also about a sense of overcoming certain global inequalities, like a lot of the force behind communism in the developing world, say in the 50s and 60s and 70s, was because it promised it was anti-imperialist. So that was one of the big appeals of communism. Within Russia itself,
so one of the major appeals is being against something.
Being against an inequality, I would say, a global inequality. That was what was seen, the way it was seen at the time.
But the global inequality, it has always existed, and it will never go away for sure.
Well, I think so.
In one way or another.
Well, that's a sort of that's particularly. I think there are different levels of equality. Which different levels of global equality. In the imperialist period, the period of European empires, was a period of high power inequalities between countries, which there are inequalities of power, inequalities of economics, and the period of European imperialism was a period of major inequalities of power between different countries, and also economics, and there was a huge reaction against that. So I think there are different degrees of global inequality, but also if we're thinking about internal social inequality, the Russian Revolution 1917 was driven, partly by a large part by a feeling of social inequality at the time. Now, of course, the communist regimes then developed claim not only that they were going to solve local inequalities, social inequalities and global inequalities, but that they were going to promote economic development. So they, in a way, that was the appeal of communism, that they could appeal both to ideas of justice and ideas of economic development. And I think that's the case with all ideologies, that really they have to, political ideologies have to make, they succeed if they can appeal on various different levels. They promise economic development, but they also promise ideas of justice and other issues. So I wouldn't say communism was just about economics, it was also about an appeal to social justice. And of course that no longer, that's why I don't think why communism is likely to come back, certainly not in the form in which we saw it in the 20th century.
Right, but any ideology and any form of political regime and any form of government, they all promise people justice.
They do.
And they always proclaim basically the very same thing.
They do. Well, but different. They proclaim justice. They proclaim that they're going to promote justice, but they promote it in different ways, and they mean different things by it. So, market liberalism, if we say, also claims that, just like communism, that it's going to promote justice deserts according to work performed, and at times it has appeared that in many countries that's working, and that is the right way to go forward. And particularly after the financial crisis in the West, of course, many people thought, well, actually, this isn't happening. This system isn't delivering this, and so they start to think, to become, to look for alternatives. And I think it's you can see the same with market liberalism as you can see one could see with communism before, or social democracy, or other types of ideology that have run into trouble in the past.
Right. Probably that's the way. But anyhow, basically we are coming to the idea of the efficient performance of economic mechanisms offered by whichever form of government. So what do you think of Russia's performance in this regard? Whether it can combine the good ideas of the past and the appealing ideas of the future in the reliable and acceptable present?
Well, I'm no real expert on contemporary Russian economics. I'm sort of more of a historian.
Yeah, but I guess you have watched some TV programs, and you read some newspapers, and you can grasp some very general ideas. And as a historian, you can have your own opinion. On how
well, I mean, I'm no expert at all, really. I mean, my sense is that the challenges involve. I mean, it's a cliche, really. I'm sure it's obvious to everybody. The challenges involve diversification from, and it clearly, when it's with lots of economies in the past and in the present, if you've relied to a large extent on a particular type of source of wealth. In Russia's case, clearly energy, but in other countries it's been other types of things. In a way, Britain is facing the same problem with a reliance on finance. A huge amount of income came from finance in the 2000s, and a lot of that has gone, and that is part of the reason for the political crisis in Britain recently. And there is a real problem with how to diversify, and the problem with that is, in all countries, is that, that you get vested interests who are used to, the economy is run in a particular way, there are certain vested interests, it's very difficult to divert the political economy of a country from one set of political economic arrangements to another set. And that is hugely problematic. And that, I imagine, well, that clearly is, as many experts say, that is the challenge, one of the big challenges facing Russia today. Now, clearly, energy is energy. Well, I mean, particularly at a time, I suppose, when climate, when people aren't looking for renewable energy sources and these sorts of things, and that again will be a particular challenge, I imagine, for the Russian economy in future. So that's a challenge for all economies, to find new sources of revenue at a time of sort of major changes to the old order, whether it may be finance in the West or energy in Russia and various other parts of the world.
And well, maybe the major question about communism, coming back to it, it's communism and democracy. Are they really compatible? Well, I mean, definitely. Well, there are some varying ideas. What democracy is, what communism is.
That's right.
So,
that's
but
right.
you see what
It's
I'm
very
trying
difficult.
to make.
Yeah, I mean, communism. Well, the problem with the term communism is that there are many communisms. I mean, the same with liberalism. There are many liberalisms, and if one looks at the history of communism, there were many. If we look at early communism, for instance, in World War I, of course, there was Lenin's version of communism, which was highly dictatorial, but also, there was council communism in Germany in the immediate post-World War I period, which was very much founded on ideas of workers' democracy. Now, so I think many communists were committed to democracy. I think there was always a problem within the communist idea of democracy, which was that how do you reconcile? How do you have a pluralist? How do you reconcile democracy with differences? A lot of communists didn't have a pluralistic view of democracy, and and some communists did therefore move in more pluralist directions. That is, they wanted to institute certain mechanisms for different views to be expressed, rather than assuming that there was one coherent workers' view, of course, or one popular view, and that it can be a problem with communist ideas of democracy, that it can lead to some communist ideas of democracy, that it could lead to an overly homogeneous view of the people and the interests of the people. But some communist theoreticians and practitioners were committed to the expressions of pluralist views. So I think that's the problem with communism. But clearly, communism in Russia, that was a major problem with communism in Russia. Clearly, that the Communist Party of the Soviet Union, Marxist-Leninist type of solutions were not committed to a pluralist form of democracy in which people could express different views, and that, of course, has a lot of the problems that we know well.
Well, probably because they were trying to find the most efficient way of managing social and economic life. Sometimes democracy is an obstacle to efficiency.
It can be, but often, you can. But a lot of sometimes what the Soviet government was interested interested in was less sort of efficiency and more ideas of mobilizing the people. That's not necessarily, you know, there were often very big conflicts between a strategy of mobilization and economic experts who were interested in efficiency. So you know, I wouldn't say that, you know, it wasn't always just democracy versus efficiency. I think often it was what we might call the conflict within the Soviet period was often a populist view of mobilization versus a view of efficiency. Neither of them were very democratic.
Right. Thank you very much for your time, and it was a great pleasure to have you here.
Okay.